There are people who no longer exist in this world, not because they were never born, but because of something more mysterious at play. We're talking bodies with no identities, codes that shouldn't exist, and 5 men who walked away from a perfectly good car into a frozen nightmare. If you think you've heard every unsolved mystery, then stay tuned, because these are sure to set your teeth on edge. The tide was coming in at Somerton Beach in Australia on December 1st, 1948. A man was found slumped against the seawall, legs crossed like he had just fallen asleep while watching the waves. He was in peak physical condition, wearing a high-end custom-tailored suit that was perfectly pressed. But when the police arrived, they noticed that a few things were off. Everything that could be used to identify this man had been perfectly removed from his attire. Someone had spent hours with a razor unpicking the brand labels from his coat, his trousers, and even his tie. The only thing on his person was a bus ticket that he hadn't used and a pack of expensive cigarettes filled with a much cheaper and different brand. The autopsy only made things worse. His spleen was 3 times the normal size, filled with blood, suggesting that a fast-acting poison had vanished before it could be detected. Months later, a hidden fob pocket was found sewn deep into the lining of his pants, and tucked inside was a tiny rolled-up scrap of paper with the words, "Tamam shud," Farsi for "it is finished." In 2022, DNA finally identified him as Carl Webb, a quiet instrument maker, but that solved nothing. Why would a man with a steady job and a family travel hundreds of miles just to sit on a beach, erase his identity, and wait for a poison to take his life? His secret code, etched into the back of a poetry book, remains unbroken to this day. In a frozen Norwegian ravine known as Death Valley, a hiker stumbled upon a site that didn't belong in the wilderness. The charred body of a woman tucked between massive boulders. She was surrounded by a strange arrangement of objects, mostly comprised of jewelry and watches, making it seem like they were part of an odd ritual. When the coroner looked closer, the horror deepened. Her neck bore the faint bruising of a blow, and her stomach was filled with over 50 sleeping pills that hadn't yet dissolved. But the most unsettling detail was her mouth. She had extensive, high-end gold filler dental work, a style completely unknown in Scandinavia, yet common in parts of East Asia or Southern Europe. At the Bergen railway station, police found her luggage along with multiple wigs and non-prescription glasses. They also retrieved a silver spoon where the hallmarks had been filed off until the metal was smooth. Even her journals were written in a shorthand code that tracked her movements across Europe under 8 different aliases. She had been wearing elaborate hats and smelling of heavy garlic, always demanding to change rooms at hotels the moment she felt the floorboard creak. But here's the part that keeps investigators up at night. In 2016, advanced DNA testing traced her back to a specific border between France and Germany, yet no family, no friend, and no government record of her existence has ever been found. She didn't just die in that valley. She had been systematically deleting herself for years. So who was she desperately trying to hide from? In February 1978, 5 young men from Yuba City vanished into the Sierra Nevada mountains. Their car was found days later, parked on a remote logging road. It wasn't stuck in the snow. It had plenty of gas and worked perfectly fine. Yet they walked away from it and headed deeper into a blizzard. The horror of this story is found 20 miles away inside a Forest Service trailer. When searchers finally broke the door down months later, they found Ted Weir. He had spent 90 days slowly starving to death. He lost half his body weight, his feet were black with frostbite, and he was wrapped in 8 layers of sheets. The most unusual thing is that Ted was surrounded by a massive C-ration locker. There was enough canned food to keep all 5 men alive for a year. There were even matches, fuel, and heavy-duty propane tanks right there in the room. But Ted never touched them. He sat in pitch black, starving and freezing to death in a room full of warmth and food. So why would 5 men leave a perfectly good car? And why would the one who made it to the shelter refuse to save himself? Some believe they weren't alone on that mountain, that something outside that trailer was too terrifying. Was Ted afraid that even the sound of a match striking would give away his position? What do you think? Most people assume that a kidnapping happens in a dark alley, far from prying eyes. But in 1966, three siblings, Jane, Arna, and Grant, stepped onto a crowded Australian beach and simply dissolved into the sunlight. They weren't alone. The beach was packed with hundreds of families, yet the Beaumont children walked into a void that hasn't been breached for 60 years. Witnesses didn't report a struggle or a scream. Instead, they described something much more unsettling: the three children playing happily with a tall blonde stranger. A local shopkeeper remembered Jane coming in to buy meat pies with a 9-shilling note, a specific amount of money her mother hadn't given her. Someone had paid for their last meal. But here is the chilling part. They were described as if they didn't look like captives. Instead, they ate that meal while laughing and lounging with the man on the grass. The terror of this case lies in the timeline. A postman who knew the family saw the children walking home alone, laughing just blocks from their front door. They were safe. They were almost home. But they never stopped over the threshold, despite decades of excavating factory floors and following deathbed confessions. Not a single shoe, a scrap of cloth, or a DNA sample has ever surfaced. It's as if the suburbs where their home was just edited them out of existence. If the children were truly blocks from home, laughing and walking alone as the postman claimed, where was the blonde stranger they had been with all morning? We often tell ourselves that a crime is based on motive, someone out for revenge, or simply an act of passion. But in 1987, the Dardine family disappeared in a way that suggests the motive wasn't human. When police entered their mobile home in Illinois, they found a scene so brutal it traumatized seasoned investigators, yet nothing of value had been taken. The father, Russell, was found miles away in a field and left in an unrecognizable state. But back at the house, the true horror was waiting. His pregnant wife, Ruby, had been injured so severely that she went into labor during the attack. The intruder ended the lives of their newborn infant and 3-year-old son, Peter, with a cold, calculated precision that left the home feeling less like a crime scene and more like a void. Within those 4 walls, an entire family tree was cut down in a single night of absolute clinical silence. This is where the professional mind starts to fracture. There were no fingerprints left on the surfaces, no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle from neighbors who lived just feet away. Despite the magnitude of the crime, there were no whispers of a secret life or a hidden debt that could explain why this specific family was chosen. For years, the case sat frozen until the serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells claimed credit, but his confession fell apart under forensic scrutiny. He couldn't describe the interior of the home or the specific details only a killer would know. It leaves us with a reality far scarier than an unsolved mystery. When a crime this organized leaves behind zero evidence, you have to ask, was this a killer who had been watching the Dardines for weeks, learning their every move? Or is it more terrifying than that? The most disturbing thing about these 5 cases isn't just the loss of life. It's the lingering presence of things that shouldn't be there. Whether it's a 9-shilling note handed to a child by a friend, or a woman sitting in a hotel room meticulously filing the hallmarks off her own silver spoons. These stories prove that the reality we live in is much thinner than we like to admit. We often look for a who, but the real nightmare is the how. How does someone leave behind a trail of physical clues, encrypted notes, and strange behaviors, while remaining completely invisible to the world? Which of these cases do you think is actually solvable, and which one feels like a glitch in our reality? Drop your best theory in the comments, and thanks for watching the Index of Otherwise. Let me know if you would like to see a deeper dive into these stories, and don't forget to stay tuned for more real-life horror stories, true crime, and paranormal events. Please subscribe or hit the like button, as it helps me to grow, and remember to stay in the light. Some shadows have a name, and some are still waiting for one.